Zero. One. Let's get started.
Everyone, my name is Nicole Pringle, and I'm the president of Gullah Business for Charleston. And I also have here the vice president, Tiffany Savage.
Hello.
And we have another exciting feature. He is a TEDx speaker, content creator, and public historian and podcaster. And I found him on TikTok because I love his content about history. We have Anthony Milian. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the work that you all do, and thank you for taking time out of your Sunday evening to have me on there. I know there's a million other things y'all could have done, but thank you for having me on today.
Well, same to you, man. Thank you for coming on because I know you have a lot going on, and thank you for taking that time out. But my first question is, how did you get started with history or being interested in being a public historian?
Oh, I mean, to be honest with you, I grew up like I stayed in down like near downtown Brooklyn. I lived in Crown Heights. And I used to hang out at the library all the time. There's this big library in downtown, close to downtown Brooklyn, called Grand Army Plaza Library, the Brooklyn Public Library. And I used to hang out there a lot. And I used to just read because when I was done with my homework and stuff like that, my mom was a New York City public school teacher. And when I was done with my homework, I used to just stay there until the library closed. So I would just look at books all the time. And both my parents, my mother was an educator, my dad was like a lifelong learner. So they really instilled with me to like never stop learning things. And my parents are both very big into history. So they kind of fostered that in me to be in history. And then the pandemic happened. Once the pandemic happened, I was doing photography at first, but I pivoted because I've still wanted to stay on social media, but because of COVID, I didn't get a lot of photo shoots and things like that. So I just started making history content. The first video I made was about the United States experimenting on Puerto Rican women, and it went crazy viral. I think it got like 300,000 likes. And I was like, okay, so people, there's a need there. You know, people want to hear about history. They want to hear about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I just did it.
I could say I'll go to the next question. So, how do you approach making history interesting and accessible to everyone, especially people who may not be as easily drawn to different subjects that you're talking about?
When it comes to like making it accessible and understandable for everyone, um, I I I I really don't aim for that, to be honest with you. When I'm giving the information out, when I'm talking about the specific subject matter, I try to do it in a very elementary way so that anybody can understand it. But, you know, of course, there's always going to be a contingent of people out there that really don't want it to be understood. And I think the app in and of itself makes everything accessible to everyone that wants to consume that. So to be honest with you, my aim, but 99% of it is the app, putting it out to the people that want to see it.
Okay.
What is your favorite history story that you've covered?
Yeah, so my favorite history story that I covered is the shared history of Puerto Ricans, Black Puerto Ricans, and African Americans. Specifically, like there's a man named Rafael Hernandez. He's a Black man from Puerto Rico, and he was like a savant, a musical savant. He's played like 14 different instruments, and he came to the United States in the early 1900s, and he signed up for World War One, and he ended up being part of Harlem, the Harlem Hellfighters, the musical group, the Harlem Hellfighters. But when you look at the Harlem Hellfighters, you'll notice that almost half of the men, if you look at who they were, almost half of the men, they were Black men, but over half of them were from Puerto Rico. But this one guy, Rafael Hernandez, went back to Puerto Rico, and he ended up making he ended up getting hired to make the anthem for the entire island. But because of a line that he put in there about the United States, it didn't get selected, but it's considered till this day to be the anthem of the island, unofficial. And a lot of people, because Mark Anthony performed it, a lot of people think that it's Mark Anthony's song. It's not. And it's not Mark Anthony's song. It's a song by a black man who was part of African American history and also part of Puerto Rican history and did amazing things. They recently in New York, he used to have a music store in New York. It was called Casa Hernandez, but it's been changed because this new people own it now, and it was changed to something else. But that was one of the biggest pieces of history that I love to talk about, and that's what I gave my TED talk on. So it was pretty fun.
Congratulations for you hosting and actually doing a TED Talk. That is impressive.
Because you have to be nominated for that, right? Or you have to be submit something.
Well, my way of going about it was very unconventional, because that's the normal process, but the TED people contacted me. So
Wow.
they contacted me, and like not only did they contact me, like the some like politicians in South Carolina had, I'm not going to put their names in there, but they had contacted me as well, and they were like, hey, I think you should really consider this. It's going to be in your town, and this is something you should really consider. So that was normally you would have to go through a nomination process and stuff like that, but my way was very, very unconventional.
Talking about awards, you just won in the state of South Carolina. Talk about that.
Did so I got an email probably about a month ago from the South Carolina Minority Commission, Commission for Minority Affairs, and then it was also the organization Mota Crosslink, their business school in Columbia, South Carolina, and they were like, we're trying to reach you. I thought it was a scam at first, because I get all these emails from people. They want, oh, we want to give you an award, but you have to pay this or pay that or whatever. I thought it was a scam, and then they kept trying to contact me, and I was like, okay, let me give these people the time of day. If they're open to do a Zoom interview, then I'll consider it. So I did the Zoom interview, and they were like, yeah, we've been following your content. We love what you're doing. You've been nominated by people across the state. At least they said at least 15 or 20 people. I can't remember the exact number. They said people across the state have been nominating you, and we want you to get the award for creative business of the year for the state of South Carolina. And I went the other day, and the rest is history. It was fun.
That's awesome.
And
That's
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to put this as a side note. I don't really believe in manifestation, but my wife does. And she said to me that manifest your life. And so I said to myself at the beginning of the year, I was like, I want three things. I want to give a TED talk. No, I didn't say a TED talk. I said I wanted to give a speech somewhere, right? And the TED talk happened. And then I said I wanted to be invited. I didn't want to just go to New York. I wanted to be invited by the National Puerto Rican Day Parade to be in the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And that happened. And then I said to myself, I want something tangible in my hand that validates what I do. And that happened as well. And so, if anybody's listening to this, manifest what you want in life, and like write it down, or it's best to write it down. I didn't write mine down, but it's best to write it down. So yeah, that's something that's helpful.
Yeah. We're big on that, big on words and what we say, because it does play out, good or bad. If you're thinking bad and you're saying it out there in the atmosphere, then, But you speak in positive, all the good things are going to come to you. So that's awesome that that happened and you got your awards and you got everything that you said.
Yeah, I wish I had like manifested $1 million or something, but
Well, that's
You
next.
do. It's always time. It's always time.
That's
It's
next.
always
always
try.
time. It's always time as long, you're still here.
Mhm.
And so this leads to another question that I have. In your opinion, being a public historian, how do you see history playing out when it comes to like social and cultural issues that you see today?
Yeah, so history repeats itself. It's repeating itself right now in our current political state. Like we have, I don't want to get too political, but I feel like, in my personal opinion, we only have one legitimate option for president, right? But I feel like in America, there is such a brain drain and such a aversion to education that there is another person, whose name I'm not going to mention, who is orange, that has gained a level of legitimacy in our political atmosphere that does not deserve it. And it's really watching this play out. It's very much reminiscent of things that happen in other countries. You know, specific Germany, when there was legitimate options and then the people chose the worst possible option. But hopefully we have 2.5 more weeks and hopefully this country makes the right decision. God, I'm hopeful. But yeah, when it comes to that, seeing seeing it happen now, also um I see with as a black man, um that the rollback of laws, like voting right protections, safety protections on your jobs, things like that, is becoming more and more, it's becoming its own brand of history. Like we're rebranding servitude, and like we're rebranding work to the point where it's almost like servitude, and it's scary because people that study history or understand historical context realize like what's happening, and it's really scary.
Well, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. And you're Puerto Rican, right? If you could just give us like a little history on Puerto Rican culture for, I guess, like a brief for Hispanic Heritage Month.
I feel like I really enjoy learning about the Black history of Puerto Rican culture.
Mhm.
That's just me. Anytime I run into a culture, I always try to find out the Black history of it
Yes.
by virtue of being Black. I'm, whatever. Yeah, but so when when it comes to like Puerto Rican culture and the Black history, it's oftentimes like swept under the rug. And sometimes within society, people in Puerto Rico say like, oh, we don't see race, but you can't not see race. You know what I mean? That you don't, that's somebody's individuality. Like you can't look at me and not see a black man. The same way so one aspect of Puerto Rican culture that I like is the idea of like public schools came from, well, the ideas of public schools on Puerto Rico came from a black woman and her brother. They were former slaves, they were formerly enslaved, and their parents taught them that your education should be paramount. And when they were liberated and freed, they started a school and they taught people how to read and write. And the literacy rate in Puerto Rico was like something like 10%. So for these two people, these two black people, to teach people how to read and write back then was very unconventional. So, I mean, that's just one aspect of it. There's a whole thing about, black people in Puerto Rico and how resilient they were and things like that.
I love that. I was just thinking about when I was in Puerto Rico, I had a lot of mofongo.
The
A
food,
lot every
yeah.
day.
There's a lot of food. There's a lot of food that that is very much African in Puerto
Yes.
Rico. There's
Mm-hmm.
mofongo, one of those things, it's very much same as Nigerian fufu, just made with plantains.
Yeah.
There's a lot. And of course there's the bananas. They eat the banana with everything. So mm.
What's
Mm-hmm.
the biggest challenge that you have faced, especially now coming to the spirit that you're a public historian?
The biggest challenge that I have faced, and I
Mm-hmm.
think I think all Black people face it in one way or another. It's that when you know something, there's a contingent of people out there that want to prove you wrong. And there's a contingent of people out there that don't like that you know that. And they want to disparage you. They want to call you stupid and dumb. There are a lot of trolls online, and
Mm.
there are a lot of trolls online, and there are a lot of nasty, mean people online, and there are a lot of like people that want to get their gotcha moment with me. Like I had one guy, like I had said something, and then I put in the comments the whole fact about the thing that I said. And the guy, he was only watching the video, and he took the clip, and he was like, "You can't trust anything this guy said." Blah 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 blah. He didn't give the whole truth behind this, that, and the third. And I was like, look at the comment that I made, and he was like, "Oh, I didn't see that. I apologize." But there's always a ton of stuff like that. And then of course when you talk, like, I talk a lot about race, you have a contingent of people out there that don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about race. They don't want to hear about the things that have been done wrong to people of color throughout the world by colonization and things like that. And so they report your videos. They say that you're spreading hate. So I've had my TikTok page taken down twice. Fortunately, uh, thanks God, I met somebody who helped me through that process, and my Instagram page was demonetized twice. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where you kind of just have to grind, and you have to keep hustling, and you have to become the subject matter expert. And then another thing, that I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday who's a historian on Instagram as well. And he said, there's an increasing thing where people don't want to hear Black history. They don't want to hear Black history from Black people. So you'll have like a white
Mm.
person that says the same thing as you, and they'll get the notoriety, they'll get the brand deals, they'll get this, they'll get that. Meanwhile, you're the person that represents the group of people you're talking about, and you are those people. And
Mm-hmm.
but they just don't want to hear it from you. They want to hear it from this person over here. So it's just another way of modern day historical colonization. But those are some of the obstacles that I run into personally.
When you said that, I started thinking about when I started doing like my genealogy and making sure my tree, just finding, researching pretty much, and going to the plantations. And I was being made fun of by my own people. My own family were making fun of me. And I'm like, first reason is I'm going because I'm learning stuff that I wasn't taught. It wasn't even
Right.
taught half of this stuff. Well,
Right.
none of it. You know what I'm saying? So, and then I can see it, I can look at it, I can touch it. I mean, I think and I think about it all the time. When I went to the plantation, one of the stories was the brick, and I was able to touch the brick and have the fingerprint still on there, and I was able to put my hand right on there, like just to see, we built everything, we did everything, we were engineers and doctors, we
And
shaped the
think about,
world.
when I go down to Charleston, I always think about, this, because when you think about how much pressure they must have been putting on that brick to leave a fingerprint 150, almost 175 years later, the back-breaking labor that they must have been going through to, like, because that clay is thick, it's not easy, it's heavy, and you have to press it in, and they did that over and over and over again. And I was reading this thing about slavery in Haiti, and they were talking about how France was so rich, so rich, and they controlled 60% of the sugar that went throughout the world. But the average slave didn't live to see their 25th birthday. And I think about I say not our ancestors, because we were separated. Some of us landed in Puerto Rico, some of us landed in South Carolina, some of us I think of
Mm.
ancestors, and I'm like, don't let anybody make fun of you for wanting to know about the difficulty that your ancestors endured, because if it wasn't for their difficulty, you wouldn't be here right now. So a lot
Exactly.
of them, a lot of our ancestors are in the ocean, and we'll never know who they are. So
That's so true. Our grandmother used to always tell us, because not only are we business partners, but we're family members too, as you know. Our grandmother used to always tell us, she said, you have to know where you came from to know where you're going. And
100%.
so that's pretty much the premise of it. But I would highly encourage you um to pursue archives. I'm a librarian, so when you're speaking certain things, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I understand the whole system with gatekeeping and information. And I think, and I said I was going to be finished with that question, but I have to ask this because
take
the
as much
fact
time
that,
as you want.
yeah, because you hit on something that I'm really passionate about is inclusivity and being, representation. Do you see eventually how history could appeal to more diverse voices being platformed? Do you see a future for that?
I think there's a future for that with respect. Um, if somebody's coming into your space, it would be like somebody coming into your house and saying how you should run things.
Mm,
You're not going to allow somebody to do that. Like, you know, I talk about African American history, but if somebody who's an African American historian says, hey, this is not correct or something like that, I give them space to correct me. Same thing goes for Puerto
mhm,
Rican history. When somebody's talking about Puerto Rican history, I would expect the same thing. So I think, there's always room for diverse voices, but I think we should have respect for each other's opinion and each other's space. Not every space is for everyone. So
mhm.
have you guys ever, I wanted to ask, have you ever been able to track the ancestry like to like the enslaved people? Like, do you know the names of some of the
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really, I was talking to somebody in my family, and so my last name is Milian, but that on my grandmother's side, their last name is Mora. So I did my ancestry, and I got in touch with this lady who lives in Puerto Rico, and she's a doctor, and she's like, but on the side, I do ancestry, genealogy, stuff like that. And her last name was Mora. And she was like, I think we might be related because our ancestry came up that we may have been related. I think, and come to find out, we were second cousins. And I was like, wait a minute, all the Moras that are on you, I said, she's like my complexion, but I said most of the Moras are like white. And she was like, yeah, because they owned us. And she goes, she was able to track the very first slave from from the last name. Excuse me, his name was Domingo. That means Sunday, because he was purchased on a Sunday, and he was 9 years old.
Mhm.
And he was 9 years old, and his last name was Mora because the person who purchased him was like a French sailor whose last name was Mora. And it was really interesting. And the family, I was speaking to her. She said there was a couple years ago with a family of this French sailor in Puerto Rico apologized to her for owning our family member. She was like, we thought that we were related, but when we do the genealogy, we see that we're not. It's because there was, purchasing enslavement there. So it's really interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, it was something when I was able to see his face. I was like, oh, so you're the person that owned, my family. So
Yeah.
it's just like, ah, and I'm walking
Does
in
it
the
make you,
house.
does it ever make you upset? Like, because you see the way you see, like, I see people in South, like, especially South Carolina, you'll see people with the same last names, and there'll be like a black
Mhm.
side, and then they'll
Mhm.
and you can you put you put it together, and you know, and you see like how a lot of like the white people live, and they're very wealthy, and they're like country club, and then you see the exact opposite in some of the black people, especially down like in the low country. Does it ever make you upset? I'm interviewing y'all now.
No, because I've been wanting to talk about this because when I went to the plantation, the first time when I came, like it was like the first week I got here, I was like, I have to go there. It's like 10 minutes from my apartment. I'm like, I have to go there. And I was so excited. I was like, yes, I'm here. I'm here. Oh my gosh. It's the Magnolia Plantations. So I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm here. Yes, I was so excited because a lot of my family there, like my great grandfather was the overseer. So like his name is mentioned, when you go and you watch the presentation, you'll see him and, his children and all that. And so I was like, there he is. And I'm like all excited and I do the tours and I'm still excited. And it was a funny story. I'll probably cut this out of the interview because I don't want to tell this story. Well, I do want to tell this story. So I'm the only Black person that's on pretty much there that day. I was looking around, there's nobody there. I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. So I go on the tour to see the houses, right? So I'm like, let me go see the homes, right? And all of a sudden I'm in awe. Like I'm just like, I can't believe I'm here. And then I hear the tour guide screaming. I'm like, what is happening? Why is he screaming? He's like, you wouldn't want your kids living in this condition. You just was not good. And he's just going off. So then he stops, everybody goes into the homes, everybody's walking around. So I said, I didn't say anything to him like I was a descendant. I said, this is the time I need to go to him and tell him who I am. And so I told him, and he was like, ma'am, I'm so sorry. He was like, I was going to talk about your great great grandfather, but he said someone that was in the tour in the group said to him that the slaves were treated good. And he was like, ma'am, he said, he's like, I have to tell the history and I have to tell it correctly. He was like, this is my job. He was like, that's not what happened. And he was like, that's why I was going off. And I was just like, okay. I had no idea what was happening. So to go into the story was I was happy, and then I went through a lot of emotions. Then I was a little confused. Then I got upset, and then I was very angry. I walked around and I was very angry, and I was like, let me leave. So I went through a lot
Yeah.
of emotions.
I thought I felt like that the first time I went to Puerto Rico as an adult, and I saw the areas where a lot of like, of course you go to San Juan, you see the beautiful building, blah blah blah, blah, and then you go to like the area where like the black people lived, and it's beautiful, it's really nice, but it's nothing in comparison to San Juan. And I felt like kind of angry because it's very underdeveloped. It's very, very agrarian, very like, I'm thinking like very what's the word in English? It's like very farmland, a lot of farmland and a lot of sugar cane. Well, there was a lot of sugar cane, and I was like, yeah, this is because this was a plantation, and that's why there's so much sugar cane here because that's what they cut, sugar cane. Yeah, I did. I felt a little anger, but then I felt hopeful because the culture is still there. They've done a really good job of preserving the culture, both in music and then also in dance and things like that. So I felt a little hopeful, but kind of pisses you off that your ancestors had to go through all of that.
Does, but at the same time, it tells you the resiliency
Yeah,
that's
Mm.
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
bloodline because I have like a different story than what Nicole's is. Where I grew up in, like Nicole's seen pretty much that we have plantations that are still around, like museums, just in Charleston, just like in Charleston, and the plantations are named after these families where you have a black side, you have a white side, and you clearly know where it comes from. These were slaves, and they just carry their master's names. But I also see too where we're becoming a culture. We don't want to talk about history. We don't want to talk about certain things. As me
Yeah.
being like, when I came into the library system, I was an educator before that. So I taught, middle school ELA. Then I went to become a public librarian. Then I went to academic libraries and went back to public. But being in those rural places where they don't want you to talk about Black history and the whole thing with critical race theory comes up, it becomes disheartening because I really am a firm believer if you do not speak on history, no matter how painful it is, it's not trying to start a riot, but it's trying to avoid the same patterns of things.
Mhm.
And it's just that whole concept, if you don't talk about it, it will surely repeat itself. And just like you mentioned, is doing that. But
Mhm.
there are so many people that are fearful of what will happen if people know.
Yeah. Well, not only, I agree 100%. I think people are fearful, but also people feel guilty. You know,
Yes,
Mhm.
that's true. And they don't know
people
how it's
feel,
going to be manifested. Yeah.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
people feel very guilty. They don't know how to process their emotions when it comes to the things that their ancestors did. And a lot of people will say things, well, like my ancestors never owned slaves, or you know how expensive a slave was back then. A lot of people in the South owned slaves. It was
Yes, they
not
do.
common. It was very common. And if you even in North Carolina history, the two biggest slave owners in North Carolina were Asian men.
Yeah.
Um,
And
that's not,
people don't think about that. Yeah.
yeah, like so like when we talk about people owning slaves, even people that were like immigrated to the United States
Mhm.
owned slaves because it was customary to do. But, and of course, you had to have some kind of money to do that, but you found a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those things where deep down inside, people know. And another thing that I think about is like how when I think about slavery is how much the church was involved. Like, for example, when I went to Puerto Rico, um, and it's also speaking to the lady who's my second cousin, who's a genealogist. She got all of the information from the church, from the Catholic Church. There
Mhm.
was one Catholic church, and I'm talking about information from the early 1800s, late 1700s, about this 9-year-old boy that came. He came from Africa, Nigeria, and
Mhm.
the church had it all. And like even like Ancestry, the DNA test company that's owned by Mormons, they have a ton of information about the like African American slavery and stuff like that. They keep all that stuff. And so, it's one of those things where you kind of like, I don't know, makes your head spin.
And I kind of have an educated guess why the church has it. Was it because the fact that most of the clergy knew how to read and write and they kept it as scribes too?
That was it too, but also like the church and the government were very intertwined in collecting money. And another thing is like the church, before there was like a national census, the Catholic Church would keep track of who got married, who died, who
Hmm.
was born, who came and went in your town, who resided. So like they were more than just, and then also the Catholic Church, like not even not just the Catholic Church, the church in general was very integral in like financing the slave ships and like the insurance companies that insured the slave ships and stuff like that. So yeah, they had their hand in it.
I think
Mhm.
the thing that's interesting about history too is just like when you get on it and you talk about certain things like certain subjects that you shouldn't talk about, like Nat Turner. Some people call him Nat Turner, some people call him Nate Turner. It all depends on what part of the country you're in. But when you talk about those conversations, are the Haitian revolt, like, like people get shook about that stuff. And then
Mhm.
too, this is another thing to actually teach too about slaves who bought their freedom or escaped freedom, like escaped slavery, and ended up purchasing slaves themselves because people
Mhm.
just didn't know. Like it used to blow my students' minds to think someone who was formerly enslaved or someone who was black had slaves.
Right,
Because
right.
there are
So,
documents in North Carolina that show that too.
yeah, like somebody purchased their freedom and they turned around and bought
Mm-hmm.
their own slaves. But the thing I think that is, even for like Nat Turner at the time, like you mentioned Nat Turner,
Mm-hmm.
like it was so out of this world for him to do what he did
It was
that they
wild.
still like they dug his body up and
Mm-hmm.
burned his body, and they took his skull. Like there's somebody out there now in America that has Nat Turner's skull.
Yes, because
Like,
they were still trying to fight for it, I think, when the movie came out.
yeah, they
And
were trying to find it. Like
they
they
were trying
wanted
to
to
find it.
find, and they found a relative of the man who owned Nat Turner. And he was like, he had so much animus towards Nat Turner that you would have thought what Nat Turner did happened yesterday.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Yeah, you
and
don't talk
some
about
somebody had made the connection that like they think that he has Nat Turner's skull. But the same thing with the Haitian Revolution. The a lot of people think the Haitian Revolution lasted a year. The Haitian
it.
Revolution was 10 years. And they
Mm-hmm.
even were able to go to the jungle and build a castle. The enslaved people were able to go into the jungle and build a castle. It's on the UNESCO World Heritage Site as one of the most
Mm-hmm.
beautiful wonders in the world, in the middle of the jungle. And like the fact that after all of that happened, they had to turn around and pay the French something like $100 billion in reparations for fighting for their own freedom.
Mhm.
Um, it's really one of those things because and that's part of the reason that we have a good portion of this country is because of the Haitian Revolution, because the French they had to sell like the Louisiana Purchase to get back some of the money from fighting in Haiti. It was such a so it shook a lot of people that these enslaved people
Mm-hmm.
fought back and in Haiti's case won.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
One of the things I think we forget as far as history goes, there were a lot of there were a lot of white people who did not agree with slavery. There was a guy in Mississippi. They made a movie about him. It's called The Free State of Jones. You remember
Yeah.
that? And
Mm-hmm.
I believe he was married to a black woman, and he picked up a gun with a bunch of other enslaved people, and they waged like guerrilla warfare for years
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
during the Civil War, and like killed a lot of Confederates. And then there was another guy, oh, I can't remember his name.
Was it John Brown? There was
John
another.
Brown. John Brown, let me tell you, his son, once they killed John Brown, they killed his son. They took his son and they embalmed him and they put his body up because they couldn't understand how a white man could do what he did
Mm-hmm.
and get his and turn against his race. They embalmed his body and they put it in a medical college. Like when you walked into the Confederate Medical College, that was the first thing you saw. And I believe there was some kind of like plaque, you know, like this is a traitor or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was really, and eventually, once the Confederates lost, they gave the body back and he was buried appropriately. But I mean, it's really like when we talk about revolt and we talk about things like that, it shakes a lot of people to the core to the point where like they don't want to talk about it at all.
I'm sorry. It's just like when you start getting on that topic, I just love stuff
Yeah, I
like
could
that
talk about
because
that all day because it's quite interesting because
Mhm.
these are things that we're losing to people that don't want to speak about it at all anymore. They're fine being ignorant. Um, and even
Mhm.
when they talk about, Black history, the Black history that they like, they miss out on so much of the substance of who these people are. Like there are a lot of conservatives, they love Frederick Douglass because, he freed himself from slavery, he became this
Mhm.
very man, blah, 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 blah. But he was very much not only anti-establishment, but he was very much like pro his people. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's really interesting, to see the pick and choose. And then, and when we talk, another thing is like when we talk about people who own slaves, 40% of white women own slaves. Like this whole idea of this, oh, I'm a Southern damsel in distress is just like, it
Mhm.
makes your head spin because these women didn't not only did they go out and buy slaves, right? They inherited slaves, which means that if you wanted to free this person or give this person their freedom because you're such a damsel in distress, you could have, but you didn't. There's like a woman in Georgia who inherited like 700 slaves and was worse than her father in how she took care of them. So anyway.
If you were to say 3 words to represent the work that you are doing, what 3 words would they be and why?
Oh gosh. So 3 words to represent the work that I'm doing. So history, fact finding, and culture. So I say fact finding because we have to know the truth behind the history. I say history because you have to know where you came from to know where you're going. And culture because the fact finding and the history tie it all together to make you who you are.
Thank you again. If anybody wants to follow you or look at more content, how can they follow you?
Yeah, so you can follow my podcast, Learn Something New Today on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok, Def Not Ant, DEFFNOTANT. And then you can follow me on YouTube. It's History with Antonio. So those are the 3 ways you can follow me.
Thank you, and we pray that you have all the most success. I'm looking forward to hearing another or seeing another TED Talk from you. And I know it's going
Thank
to be an interesting topic. So, and I hope you reach that billionaire status because I'm believing for you.
A pleasure. And I wish you guys all the success in what you're doing and your ventures for real.
Ladies and gentlemen.